Welcome to JSA TV Europe and our live two-day event on 2023 predictions. I'm Jean-Marc Slim, and joining me today is Barry Cross, who is the global lead of data center digital infrastructure practice at BCLP. Barry, always a pleasure speaking to you.
Nice to see
you. Nice to you too. Let's chat through the biggest regulatory and legal challenges and changes that the sector has seen this year. So, I'll give the floor to you. Talk us through everything that has been going on over the last 12 months across Europe, the UK, the practice that you cover, basically.
Yeah, look, what a year it's been. We've seen massive global changes and some real tremors going through the world. And I guess where do you start? The pace of change has never been quicker in the world generally, and in the digital space in particular. Interesting on the regulatory side, the industry is often impacted by changes that aren't targeted specifically at the industry. And a good example of that is obviously energy and all the challenges that energy has faced, and in some ways quasi regulations. And we just need to look at the various moratoria that have been on data center development, either official or unofficial ones. Amsterdam comes to mind, as well as Dublin, Ireland. People have been talking in the German market as well about the limitations that are being placed on data center development. But in some ways, I think in this year, the regulatory impact that jumps out at me the most is sanctions. And that's possibly one that people wouldn't have thought of. But the sanctions that we've seen have such a pervasive impact across everything that we've been doing. The care that one has to take when undertaking M&A, just normal investment financing, to ensure that you're not breaching sanctions, your supply chains, that actually the implications of sanctions go far wider than people realize. And indeed, we've been involved in transactions in Europe where ultimately those transactions have fallen apart because of a concern that there may be a sanctions issue in relation to those transactions.
Were those deals more towards Eastern Europe, or?
No, they're in mainstream Europe as well. And it can be as simple as there's just a customer or a supplier where there's a question mark, and depending on the risk approach of the individual funder or the investor, there's a decision to be made. What view do you take on that? Can you get the information that gets you comfortable and not get the information that gets you comfortable?
Okay, interesting. Maybe a bit of a plain question that doesn't have an answer at this stage, at this time in place. But how do you expect that to change next year? Is it too early to talk about even those things?
Well, it's very hard to predict where we're going to go in terms of further sanctions, I guess. Hopefully that's not going to be necessary. I think in the wider regulatory sphere, there seems little doubt that ESG sustainability remains very high on the agenda. It's clearly no longer simply, for the data center space anyway, about purely power. Water is becoming an increasingly important factor, and we had the announcement in the UK around Thames Water looking into water consumption. I think with the collapse of FTX, crypto is now very much under the limelight. Will we see more regulatory action taken in relation to crypto as a result? And then it's important to recognize that the data center space, some of the biggest players in them have much wider businesses, the hyperscalers in particular. And to what extent are those businesses going to be under the microscope from a regulatory perspective? The competition issues that are always being talked about. And then there's the foreign direct investment and the controls on foreign direct investment. We've already seen the impact of that over the last year, but I think that is going to be a theme that is going to continue. There is a level of protectionism coming into the world that is driven by concern over, should we say, unfriendly foreign players, but also I think a more nationalistic attitude that we're seeing across the world Obviously, we've had Brexit in the UK, but even within Europe itself, the individual countries are each looking at their own protectionist regimes and trying to work out what do they need to do to protect themselves and to protect jobs and to protect their own economies in a very challenged world.
I mean, the landscape has really changed over the course of this year to levels we haven't seen in decades. So it will definitely be there'll be a lot of things skating down towards the data center space next year. And from all the conversation we've been having, regulatory does seem to be a big topic for next year with everything out of Brussels. But it's interesting that you mentioned the hyperscalers and how, because they do have a far-reaching business model. It's not just data centers. They kind of just is the basis of their wider business. But the EU does like a little bit of their pieces sometimes, especially when it comes to data protection. How do you expect that to change and not change, but like how do you expect it to go next year? Are we going to see Brussels trying to bite a little bit out of Facebook, Meta, out of Google, Microsoft, a little bit more? We have all these sovereign clouds coming up in Europe as well. We have Gaia X, which in part is meant to fight back some of those guys. What's your view in that?
Look, I think that there is clearly a theme. They are very big. They're very big targets from a tax perspective, from a GDP perspective. There is clearly a view within Europe regarding sure that the individual is protected. And I think it's unlikely that is going to suddenly stop. We'll see escalation of that. I think is a lot to predict. I wouldn't want to suggest that we will see an escalation, but I do think we will certainly see more of the same. It's a continuing theme that there is a battle going on to some extent between the regulators and industry, and it's all industry really. They're struggling to work out what is the right level of protection and getting the balance. You've got to remember that these businesses are really integral to society, and that means integral to the. So we have a very, very difficult line to tread in the world today in terms of making sure that we don't strangle commerce in the name of what we think is the individual's privacy. Individual's right, incredibly important, but we also need to ensure that we can have trade as well, and exactly the line that the EU are trying to get right.
Okay, and then based on the work that you're doing and maybe what you've got coming up next year, how have things changed around sustainability? You've already briefly mentioned sustainability and regulation, especially around sustainability, but the conversation on renewables and sustainability, ESG, is changing a lot, and there's more regulation coming in, especially in the second half of next year. How are your clients or the customers you work with addressing those or reacting to those? Is it making life a lot harder?
It's not making life more interesting. What we're certainly seeing is that the market, particularly around the funding market, is maturing. I think it's important to understand that there are different types of funding and investing on a green basis. You obviously have the concept of the green loan, which is generally more project aimed at a specific project, as opposed to more sustainability linked loans, which are more about making the borrower more sustainable through incentives. Fundamentally, sustainability is really hard. It's really challenging, and because if it was easy, we wouldn't be having lots of global conferences trying to work out how on earth do we do what needs to be done in order to fundamentally save the planet. And it's hard because it's also very difficult to measure, and everything has its own challenges. What does success look like on an individual basis? And frankly, what happens if an individual project or a loan seeking to improve sustainability isn't successful? And I think all the regulations around it are there for that purpose, to try and ensure that there is a level of honesty. And it does create challenges for businesses. As I said, it's interesting. It is a further layer of bureaucracy, which is important to recognise. In terms of what we're doing, I think the clear relationship between data centers in particular as massive power users and the power creators, the power generators, is an obvious area, and work that we've done recently with Energia, for example, in its arrangements with Microsoft, are a great example of how power users and power producers can work together to help significantly move the dial in the renewable space and start achieving real movement towards the net zero that we need.
Interesting. Picking up now on the practice itself that you oversee, what's the plans for the division in terms of countries, teams, staff? So now more on the business side of BCLP as opposed to the industry regulation.
Yeah, so that we've had a great 2022. We've grown with significant hires both in France and in Germany, and that's paying real dividends for us, with lots of new and exciting work flowing in, both in the digital space, but also the wider tech and power and energy space as well. And I think our sectoral focus means that we've got great bench strength in the digital space across your corporate finance, real estate, M&A, and we're looking to capitalize on that and do more multinational deals, working with our preferred firms in all the other jurisdictions. And unlike, I think, a lot of firms in the space where the focus is very much at the M&A high level, we're looking at both the M&A of finance and at the asset level. We like to get our hands dirty, quite literally, in terms of the feeling the assets, working on those assets as they're being developed from the ground up. And fundamentally, we love this space. We feel we can make a difference in it. We love talking about it and to the people in it. Because for us, it is all about the people. The people is what makes the industry, and it's people that will ultimately drive the change that we need to see.
It is still the human capital that's so important on top of it all.
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you, if there was one question that I didn't ask you, what would that question be?
Oh, that's a real curveball. Normally, the question most people want to ask is, what would I be doing if I wasn't doing this?
Well, we can answer that one after.
I think a question is really around what do we, with the current economic climate that we have, where do we see the sort of the M&A space going in the digital space? Because I think that there are questions over it. Clearly, the wider M&A space faces challenges. So it's whether or not those same challenges will be felt in the digital space.
Especially with the cost of capital.
Exactly.
And then I guess the last question is, what would you be doing if you weren't doing this?
I honestly,
you wanted to be asked that question.
I know. If it wasn't, if I could literally do anything I wanted, I'd probably, boringly enough, be spending my time sitting learning Jewish law more than anything else. But if it was a career change, I'd probably stay in the data center industry and probably be involved in building data centers, because I love it. I think it's great.
Okay, I was expecting something more like music, cinema, something completely.
No, I'm far too uncultured for anything like that, Jerry.
Oh, well, join the group. It makes two of us. Barry, as always, it's a pleasure speaking to you. As for our viewers, thank you for tuning into JSA TV Live. Don't forget to check our social channels for more content. Until next time, happy networking.
Thank you.